Hello everyone, welcome again to our tutorial session um, on thermodynamics. This is the second more or less episode of our tutorials. Like I said in our first session, I told you that the main reference book here is Thermodynamics, an Engineering Approach by Yunus Sengel and then Michael Boyce. So there are other conceptual, questions that we can be answering. So if you have such questions, you can post them in the comment section for me to address them later on for you. Okay. But for now, I can move on to one of the simplest calculations that we always see. So for our second part here, we are looking at the case where we have a vacuum gauge. We know what a gauge is used for, right? Connected to a chamber that reads 35 kilopascal at a certain location where the atmospheric pressure is 92 kilopascal. Now we are to determine the absolute pressure in the chamber. You see, this is very straightforward and this is easy. Based on our knowledge in the fundamental parts of thermodynamics, we know that we can easily say anytime we have atmospheric pressure, okay, if we add that to our gauge pressure, we should get the absolute pressure. Okay, this formula is something you have to pay attention to. So at all point in time, anytime we have a gauge pressure, we just add it to atmospheric pressure to get absolute pressure. But you see, we have two types of gauge pressures. We have the positive gauge and then the negative gauge. Normally, if they are referring to the negative gauge pressure, they use the word vacuum, okay? So if you hear a vacuum, it means that we have a negative gauge pressure. So at that point, your equation becomes more or less like P atmospheric plus a certain negative, pressure, okay, must be equal to what? The absolute what? Pressure. You get the idea? So for this particular task, they gave us something simple. So if we are to even bring out the formulation, we know that P atmospheric plus our P gauge, we should have what? Our P absolute, right? Good. P absolute. So in this case, I can say that atmospheric pressure here is what? 92, okay, kilopascal. And then we are saying that plus the negative gauge pressure, which is negative what? 35, must be equal to our P. Let's call this let's go here. So it's just a tank display. So let's call this P what? ABS, which is our absolute pressure. So this implies that our P ABS, the absolute, must be equal to what? Just 92 minus what? 35. And this gives what? Okay, so we have 57 kilopascal. So this is the final answer for this problem. So always pay attention to some of these things, okay? Okay, so anytime we ask for absolute pressure, is basically equal to what? P ATM plus what? P gauge. So we can use, let's say, a reference here as ATM, okay, and then we can put a certain pressure here, A, and then we put another pressure here, let's say B. So we put an absolute line here, which is 0 absolute. So if I measure from here to here, I'm measuring from the absolute 0, so this will give me PB absolute, right? So if I measure from here to here that will be PA absolute. Now, if I measure from this to that is the atmospheric is an absolute value. However, if I use my atmospheric as my reference and I decide to measure, you see that atmospheric becomes what? the mirror line. So it will be more or less like giving me a negative value because I'm moving the negative direction, and this will be the positive direction. So if my pressure is below atmospheric, you can see that this will give me vacuum, P vacuum, which is more or less like a negative value. And if it is above atmospheric, it becomes what? A positive value. So I'm going to get what? The P positive what? Gauge. All right. Yes, so take note of these things. All right. So we end our session here. If you have any comment or any, question, you can leave it with me here. Okay. So I've also tabulated or more or less like solved them for you. We have the display. Okay. So we can have it simple as that. So by definition, we can compute this as this. Okay. I just quoted the negative directly based on what I have, and then we ended up having this. Okay, take note of that. Thank you for your attention. All right, have a good one.